and you're throwing your hat in the ring from Canada? Come on. They still haven't solved dairy. Two countries on the whole world retaliated against the United States of America tariffs. China, which we all know, and Canada.
We don't have to take a back seat to anyone in the world, and we sure the heck don't have to take a back seat to President Trump.
Canada, I love Canada. I have so many friends in Canada, but they've been very, very poorly led.
Remember when Canada was the quiet neighbor to the north? The country that seemed to live in a perpetual state of politeness. The one that said sorry even when you bumped into them. The one that played by the rules, kept its head down, and avoided drama. For decades, that was the image. Maple leaves, hockey, and a steady, dependable partner in trade. Well, those days are over. When President Trump slapped a 35% tariff on Canadian goods, the move was meant to send a clear message. We're in charge. You'll play by our rules. Washington expected Canada to flinch, to scramble for a deal, maybe even to quietly accept whatever terms were thrown their way. But that's not what happened. Instead of rolling over, Canada came back swinging. And not with bluster or chest-thumping speeches, but with a calm, calculated counterpunch that caught almost everyone off guard. The kind of move that makes you realize the quiet neighbor has been paying attention all along and knows exactly where to hit. I've been following this story for months, digging through trade data, cross-checking government reports, combing through corporate earnings calls, and even reading the fine print in industry filings. This isn't about political spin or talking points. These are hard numbers, and they tell a story that flips the script on who's actually winning this so-called trade war. Before we get into the data, let's rewind for a second. Do you remember when the US-Canada border was just a line on a map for business? When trucks rolled back and forth without a second thought? When trade flowed like a river, steady, predictable, and mutually beneficial? No threats, no tariffs, no us versus them rhetoric. Just business. That's the world we've lost. Here's what Trump thought would happen. He'd hit Canada with a 35% tariff. Canada would panic. Washington would dictate the terms. A textbook, strong-arm negotiation. But there was one big flaw in that plan. He completely misread his opponent. Prime Minister Mark Carney didn't flinch. He didn't panic. He didn't even raise his voice. Instead, he did something far more effective. He let the numbers do the talking. And here's the number that changes everything. 95% of Canadian exports to the US are still tariff-free under the USMCA trade deal. That means the real tariff rate Canada faces isn't anywhere near 35%. It's somewhere between 2% and 5%. On paper, the tariff looked like a hammer blow. In reality, it was more like a tap on the shoulder. Economists are calling it a swing and a miss, a move that was supposed to cripple Canada's trade position, but barely made a dent. And the best part, Canada didn't need to shout about it. They just kept trading, kept exporting, and quietly proved that sometimes the smartest way to win a fight is to make your opponent think they've already won. Let me throw this at you. In your own life, when someone overplays their hand, whether it's in business, a deal, or even a personal argument, what usually happens? 9 times out of 10, they end up losing more than they gain. That's exactly what's unfolding here. Trump went into this thinking Canada needed America far more than America needed Canada. But the numbers? They tell a completely different story. 9 million American jobs depend directly on trade with Canada. 9 million. We're talking auto plants in Michigan, steel mills in Pennsylvania, aerospace factories in Kansas, real people, real paychecks. And here's the kicker. Canada buys more American goods than Japan, Korea, China, the UK, and France combined. That's $359 billion a year flowing into the US economy. So if your biggest customer is sitting across the table, do you really start the conversation by threatening them? While Trump was busy playing checkers with tariffs, Canada was quietly playing chess and thinking several moves ahead. Think about it like running your own business. If your biggest customer suddenly becomes unreliable, what's your first move? You find new customers. And that's exactly what Canada did, but on a massive national scale. This spring, Canadian exports outside the US hit an all-time high. Sales to Japan jumped 23%, to Germany up 46%, to the UK nearly tripled. They didn't just find new buyers, they rewired their entire trading system. And that shift puts those 9 million American jobs in a much more vulnerable spot because Canada is proving they don't have to rely on just one market anymore. Here's one example that really drives drives it home. When American wines vanished from Canadian shelves during the dispute, something fascinating happened. Canadian wine sales in Quebec shot up 60%. Imports of U.S. wine collapsed by 98% compared to last year. Now, Canadian wines control more than a quarter of their own domestic market. That's not just a sales bump, that's a cultural shift. And it happened because tariffs nudged people to look inward and try local. And Canada didn't stop there. Take aluminum. They're one of the world's biggest producers, especially in Quebec. For years, they'd ship raw aluminum to the U.S., where it would be turned into cans and other goods, then shipped back. Tariffs hit both ways. So instead of fighting it, Canada built its own can industry. That move alone is about to strip $1 billion in business away from American manufacturers. What started as punishment turned into a domestic growth strategy. Then came the moment that proved this wasn't just about economics. When Canada recognized Palestinian statehood, Trump erupted, warning that trade deals would get very difficult. Canada went ahead anyway. And in that moment, the world saw something different. A country willing to take a stand, even if it meant staring down its biggest trading partner. This is a Canada that's no longer knocking on Washington's door for permission. And this moment, it's not just about Palestine. It's about something bigger, sovereignty. The quiet neighbor finally looking the superpower in the eye and saying no. Meanwhile, the numbers coming out of the U.S. are starting to paint an ugly picture. In May, the American trade deficit jumped nearly 19%. Exports slipped, imports stayed flat. Aluminum prices, through the roof, up 80% since May. And that ripples into everyday life. Beer cans, car parts, kitchen appliances, all more expensive. The average price of a new car in the U.S. just crossed $48,000. If you've lived through past trade cycles, you've seen this movie before. Tariffs go up, costs go up, and the people who end up paying the most aren't the politicians. It's workers, families, and small businesses. But here's the move that might matter most. Canada just sent its first LNG tanker to Asia. For decades, almost every drop of Canadian energy exports flowed south to the U.S. Now, they're getting 35% higher prices in Asia, and those deals are being signed in euros and yuan, not U.S. dollars. Every time that happens, America's leverage in global trade slips just a little bit more. I'm not here to take sides. These aren't talking points. They're straight from trade reports and industry data. But the implications are huge. For America, it means higher costs, less leverage, and a growing dependence on a neighbor that's no longer acting like the junior partner. For Canada, it means a more independent economy, stronger homegrown industries, and a louder voice on the world stage. So here's what I want to hear from you. Does this kind of confrontation make both countries stronger in the long run or weaker? And how do you think this ends? Drop your thoughts in the comments. You've seen enough trade wars to know how these stories usually play out. And if this breakdown helped you see the bigger picture, share it with someone who still thinks tariffs are simple. Because here's the truth. The quiet neighbor who used to always play by the rules, they still are. They're just not playing by America's rules anymore. And that's where we leave it for now. Thanks for watching and stay tuned, because the next chapter in this story might be closer than you think.